Deep in the heart of the Sahara, a giga-project luxury resort was hosting 500 of the world's elite for a celebration in the dunes. They believed they were safe behind glass walls and climate-controlled domes. But 200 feet beneath the sand, an ancient aquifer, a massive underground lake, had just collapsed, triggering a sand liquefaction event that would swallow the entire resort in minutes. The ground was literally turning into water, but the vibration was so deep and slow that the resort's seismic sensors ignored it as wind noise. Only Sahara, a rescue camel with a blind eye, could feel the earth dissolving. This is the story of the animal who fought a sea of sand to save 500 souls from a desert grave. Title: The Quicksand, called the Sentinel of the Dunes. Chapter 1: The Liquid Earth. The Mirage Grand was a $2 billion oasis of glass and steel, a defiant middle finger to the harsh reality of the Sahara. Built on what geological surveys called stable limestone bedrock, it was marketed as the world's most secure luxury destination. 500 of the world's most influential leaders and celebrities were gathered under its massive polycarbonate domes, celebrating in a world of infinity pools and climate-controlled gardens. They believed that human engineering had finally tamed the desert, turning a wasteland into a sanctuary of absolute safety. But the desert is a living entity with a memory that spans millennia, and it does not take kindly to the weight of glass and steel. Beneath the stable foundation lay a forgotten tectonic fissure, a jagged wound in the Earth's crust that had remained dormant for 10,000 years. A minor seismic shift deep in the African plate had just breached a prehistoric aquifer, a massive underground lake of pressurized water. This water was now surging upward, forced by the weight of the sand above into the very pores of the desert floor. This triggered a phenomenon known as deep-seated liquefaction, the most terrifying event in geology. In a matter of minutes, the water saturated the sand, causing the friction between the grains to vanish. The ground was no longer solid, it was behaving like a boiling liquid. To the guests inside the gala, the world still felt firm, but in reality, the $2 billion resort was now floating on a sinking ship of sludge. The foundation was no longer anchored, it was drifting into a bottomless pit of wet silt. The resort's safety team monitored a smart foundation system that utilized 500 fiber-optic tilt sensors and pressure plates. However, the system had a fatal, structural blind spot. It was programmed to detect seismic shaking, the violent movements of an earthquake. It was not calibrated to detect vertical settling. As the resort began to sink at a rate of 1 mm per second, the AI dismissed the data as natural settlement or thermal expansion. The screens remained green even as the abyss opened beneath the floorboards. Inside the grand ballroom, the elite guests were clinking crystal glasses and laughing under the glow of $1,000 chandeliers. They were oblivious to the fact that the pillars holding up the roof were slowly being pulled into a subterranean whirlpool. The air conditioning hummed, masking the low-frequency groan of the earth. The world was standing on the edge of a desert grave, and the only creature who could hear the ground dissolving was a one-eyed rescue camel tethered in the shadows of the outer stables. Chapter 2: The Infrasonic Warning. Camels possess a biological gift honed over 6 million years of evolutionary struggle: infrasonic reception. Their specialized hooves are not just pads, they are seismic acoustic sensors, and their inner ears can detect low-frequency vibrations that travel through the earth long before they reach the surface. Sahara, a one-eyed rescue camel with a scarred flank, felt the collapse of the aquifer 5 miles away. To her, the earth didn't feel solid, it felt like a drum being struck from the inside by a giant. While the other camels in the stables remained tethered, confused by the shift in the air, Sahara's survival instincts shifted into an aggressive gear. She could feel the hum of the liquefaction traveling up through her legs and into her skull, a sound that signaled a total terrain failure. She let out a guttural, terrifying roar, a sound that was half scream and half engine growl. With a violent surge of her 1,000-pound frame, she snapped her reinforced lead rope as if it were made of silk. Sahara didn't run away from the resort to save herself, she ran toward the center of the vibration. Her blind eye, lost to a sandstorm years ago, made her movement look erratic and wild, but her remaining eye was locked on the horizon with surgical precision. She could see the dune slump, the subtle, rhythmic falling of the sand ridges that preceded a sinkhole. She burst into the resort's lush garden area, her wide hooves churning through the soil that was already beginning to feel like wet concrete beneath her weight. She reached the perimeter of the main gala dome just as the first ornamental fountain began to tilt. Sahara didn't stop. She lunged toward the glass entrance, her massive body a battering ram of fur and muscle. She let out another roar, a sound so primal it cut through the jazz music playing inside the ballroom. The security guards reached for their tasers, thinking a wild animal had gone rabid, but they failed to notice that the water in the infinity pools was no longer splashing, it was draining into the floor. Sahara's roar was an infrasonic match for the Earth's groan. She began to strike the reinforced glass of the dome with her head, her skull acting as a hammer against the polycarbonate. She wasn't trying to gain entry for food or shelter, she was trying to break the vacuum seal of the dome. Her instinct told her that if the structure remained sealed as it sank, the pressure differential would cause the glass to implode with the force of a bomb. She was trying to give the 500 souls inside a way out before the desert swallowed the door. Chapter 3: The 60-Second Breach. A young stable hand named Omar, who had spent years earning Sahara's trust, was the first to realize that the camel wasn't attacking, she was panicked for a reason. He ran toward her, intending to calm her, but as he stepped onto the marble walkway, he felt his boot sink into the stone. The marble wasn't breaking, it was dipping into the sand like a spoon into honey. Omar looked at the central fountain and saw the water swirling into a dark hole that had opened in the bottom of the basin. Omar began to scream for an evacuation, but the guests were hesitant to leave the air-conditioned luxury for the chaos of a mad camel and a dusty garden. They looked at their phones, waiting for an official alert from the smart city's AI, but the AI was silent. Sahara didn't wait for a consensus. She grabbed the fabric of Omar's tunic in her teeth and dragged him toward the emergency manual exit, her movements desperate and powerful. She then turned and charged the glass dome one final time with the full momentum of her weight. The glass shattered in a spectacular explosion of shards, and as the seal broke, the floor of the ballroom suddenly dropped 3 feet with a sickening, wet thud. The Mirage was no longer a luxury resort, it was a cage sinking into the sea. The screams finally started as the guests realized the floorboards were no longer solid. Sand began to pour through the cracks in the foundation, filling the ballroom with a fine, suffocating dust that signaled the beginning of the end. Sahara stood at the jagged opening she had created, refusing to flee even as the ground beneath her began to liquefy into a whirlpool. Because she had broken the glass, the guests were able to scramble out of the dome before the sinking pressure wedged the doors shut forever. Omar acted as the bridge, calling the guests toward Sahara's position. The camel stood like a mountain of granite in a world of moving silt, her wide, splayed hooves acting like natural snowshoes that kept her from being sucked into the void. The evacuation was a race against a 60-second clock. The main support pillars of the resort were now leaning at a 40-degree angle, and the sound of snapping steel echoed like gunshots across the dunes. Sahara didn't budge, even as the sand rose to her chest. She allowed the terrified guests to grab onto her harness, her incredible strength pulling them from the suction zone of the sinking dome. She was a living anchor in a sea of dissolving earth, holding the line between life and a desert grave. Chapter 4: The Human Anchor. For 60 agonizing minutes, the rescue operation continued under the shadow of a collapsing empire. The sand around the resort was now a violent whirlpool, pulling everything, palm trees, statues, and luxury cars, toward the center of the liquefaction core. Sahara's muscles were trembling with a lethal level of fatigue, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she fought the relentless pull of the earth. Yet, every time a hand reached for her, she leaned back into the solid ground, refusing to let the desert win. Omar and the security team used Sahara's harness as a primary winch, hauling the last of the elderly guests from the tilting ballroom. The ground was now so soft that a human could not stand for more than 5 seconds without sinking to their knees, but Sahara's unique anatomy allowed her to distribute her weight. She was a biological miracle in a world where technology had failed. She was the only thing that wasn't sinking, a silver-furred sentinel standing against the tide of the Sahara. Just as the last guest was pulled to the safety of the rocky ridge, the main dome of the Mirage Grand finally gave way. With a sound that could be heard for 20 miles, the $2 billion structure buckled and vanished into the earth. A massive plume of dust and pressurized air shot into the sky as the dome imploded. The luxury resort was gone in a heartbeat, replaced by a smoking, jagged crater that reached deep into the ancient aquifer. The survivors stood on the ridge, huddled together in the freezing night air of the desert, watching the spot where they had been eating dinner just an hour before. They looked at Sahara, who was now slumped on the solid rock, her legs splayed and her one good eye clouded with exhaustion. She had inhaled a dangerous amount of dust and her body was bruised from the harness, but she was alive. The silence of the desert returned, heavy and absolute, broken only by the sound of 500 people breathing. When the dust finally settled, the scale of the survival was staggering. Not a single life had been lost. The billionaires, the celebrities, and the staff, people who had never shared a word, were now united by a single, one-eyed animal. They realized that their wealth had bought them a gilded cage, but a rescue animal's instinct had bought them their lives. The desert had claimed the glass and the steel, but it had failed to claim the souls, thanks to a camel who heard the earth scream. Chapter 5: The Desert's Debt. When the rescue helicopters arrived at dawn, the pilots were stunned by the sight from the air. A perfect, concentric circle of sand had swallowed the entire multi-acre facility, leaving nothing behind but a hole that looked like an open mouth in the dunes. In the center of the survivors stood Sahara, her coat caked in salt and silt, looking like a prehistoric statue. The engineers who later analyzed the seismic data were speechless. That smart system had recorded nothing until the moment of the collapse. The official report stated that no known technology could have predicted a liquefaction event of this magnitude with enough lead time to evacuate 500 people. The report went on to credit the manual breach of the structure and the 60-second head start as the only reasons for the survival. Sahara was no longer a stray or a rescue animal, she was a national hero. The billionaires she had saved didn't just offer her treats, they created a foundation in her name to protect the ancient aquifers of the Sahara. Sahara was retired to a private, climate-controlled sanctuary in the Atlas Mountains, where the ground is made of solid granite and the air is always cool. She is attended to by a team of veterinarians and her faithful companion Omar, who refuses to leave her side. Her one good eye still watches the horizon, and whenever the wind shifts, she tilts her head, listening to the deep music of the earth that only she can truly understand. That Mirage Grand was never rebuilt. Instead, the crater was turned into a memorial, a place where travelers can stop and reflect on the power of nature and the limits of human ego. A bronze statue of Sahara stands at the edge of the pit, her head held high and her wide hooves planted firmly on the rock. It serves as a reminder that the most advanced, smart system on the planet is a heart that is tuned to the frequency of the wild. Sahara proved that the desert is not a place to be conquered, but a place to be respected. She showed the world that even in an age of satellites and AI, we are still dependent on the creatures who walked the earth long before we arrived. Her legacy is the 500 lives that continue to thrive across the globe, each of them a living testament to the night the desert turned to water and a camel stood her ground. Chapter 6: The Legend of the One-Eyed Sentinel. As the years pass, the story of the Quicksand core has become a modern legend, a tale told to every traveler who enters the deep desert. It is taught in schools as a lesson in biomimicry and environmental respect. Sahara's infrasonic sensitivity has led to a new field of research, with scientists developing a bioacoustic sensors that mimic the structure of a camel's hoof to protect cities built on unstable ground. The one-eyed sentinel's gift has become a shield for humanity. In her mountain sanctuary, Sahara has become a symbol of peace. People travel from all over the world just to sit in her presence, hoping to catch a glimpse of the animal who stared down a liquefaction event and didn't blink. She is no longer the erratic animal of the stables, she is a queen of the dunes, a creature who commands the respect of the very people who once ignored her. She has found her place in the world, and it is a place of honor. Omar often sits with her in the evenings, watching the sun set over the peaks. He knows that Sahara is still listening, still guarding. He knows that the earth is a restless thing, and that somewhere, another aquifer is shifting or another dune is slumping. But he also knows that as long as there are sentinels like Sahara, there is hope. The desert may have the power to swallow cities, but it cannot swallow the bond between a human and the animal who saves them. The 500 survivors hold a reunion every year, a gathering that has become a global force for environmental change. They call themselves the Saharans, and they use their vast resources to fund rescue missions and ecological protection. They realize that they owe their existence to a 60-second window of time created by a creature they once considered primitive. They are the living debt of the desert, and they pay it every day by honoring the wild. As the final light of the day fades, Sahara lets out a contented rumble, a low-frequency sound that echoes off the mountain walls. It is a sound of safety, a sound of a job well done. The Sentinel is at rest, but the lesson remains. In the heart of the desert, where the sand turns to water and the glass turns to dust, the only thing that lasts is the loyalty of a friend. Sahara didn't just survive the desert, she conquered the darkness within it. A $2 billion sensor system said the ground was solid. A one-eyed Camel said it was a trap. If Sahara hadn't broken that glass, 500 people would be part of the sand today. If you believe that animals are the true guardians of our world, hit that like button and subscribe right now. The question of the day: have you ever seen an animal act crazy right before a storm or an earthquake? What did they do? Tell me your sixth sense stories in the comments, I read every single one. Don't let Sahara's legend be swallowed by the dunes. Click the notification bell and I'll see you in the next epic survival story.